access recording, and also for folks who are on the call, because I know sometimes there are things that we might miss. There's a lot of information we're covering, and so I want you all to be able to have a chance to access this info. So I can go ahead and start and introduce myself as folks are coming in. I am Michaela Wright. I use they them pronouns, and I am the program manager for the Community Wellbeing Initiative with Best Starts for Kids in Public Health. And very excited to be sharing this RFP with you all. As you saw, my colleague Erin also introduced herself, and she is amazing and has done a lot of work on this RFP. And so she also is a resource who's hanging out, but also happy to answer any questions folks may have. But I encourage you all to introduce yourselves in the chat, to just share a little bit more about yourselves. And let's get into it. So this is the info session for the Youth Led Communications campaign. And I am super, super happy that this is finally a thing that's existing. There's been so much work that we put into this. And so I am hoping that you all are super engaged. And if you have any questions, definitely don't hesitate to ask. I welcome questions, and I really like to just know more about whatever support folks may need. So let's get into the agenda. So I'll be doing a brief overview of just BSK. Where some people may be familiar with us, others may not be as familiar. And so it's always good to just ground folks in who we are and what we do, especially since there's so much work and there's so many of us doing really cool projects across the county. And then just going over what community well-being is, since we are a subset of Best Starts. And then I'll get more into the RFP itself. And questions, you can save them at the end if you want, but I also encourage you to ask during the middle of the presentation as well. Even if it feels like a simple question, please ask. And so in terms of logistics for today, definitely put your questions in the chat, or if you need to say it out loud because maybe it's a little more complicated, you can always raise your hand and I'll make sure to pause so I can answer your question. And for follow-ups, like if you have any questions at all, you can always email the email that's right here on the presentation. So phi.thompson@kingcounty.gov will be the main email that you can reach out to. So just jumping into things, with Best Starts for Kids, our vision overall is to ensure that babies are born healthy, that kids are thriving, and young people grow up to be happy, healthy, and successful adults. And our mission is really to strengthen families and communities so that we can see babies that are born healthy and children thriving, and establishing a strong foundation. And I love these photos. They always make me a little happy. And going into this next slide, a big focus of our work, and this will come up as we're talking about the RFP itself, is equity. And so going into this, for anyone who's curious just about how equity fits into our work as an overall strategy, I definitely encourage you all to check out the Children and Youth Advisory Board equity statement. But basically, we recognize that equity is an ardent journey, and that it is defined by people most impacted. We also acknowledge that it can be disruptive and sometimes uncomfortable, but it is fundamental to building the communities that we want to build. And there is more about this equity work that we do as well in the RFP announcement for anyone who is curious and interested in learning more about equity and how it shows up in county work. But going into this next slide around our principles, I think what's unique about Best Starts and what I honestly really love about it is that our work is grounded in our promotion, prevention, and early intervention, as well as policy and systems change. So much work that we're used to seeing that comes out of government often is focused more on that deep end intervention. But what we want to focus on is like, what can we do for our children? How can we prioritize promotion and investing early? Because we recognize that everyone is full of possibilities and deserving of good things. And we really want them to start off with that strong foundation. We also recognize that intervening early increases the likelihood of success and well-being overall for our communities. And we also know that in order to really see this work happen, we have to also invest in changing systems and policies so that our communities can thrive. So our work is very, very strength-based. And so I definitely will go more into that in terms of how it relates to this RFP. Yeah, so I think what's very, very cool, especially in how it relates to the Community Wellbeing Initiative, is that typically we might see a lot of deep end interventions, but this time around, we're really focusing on a promotion and prevention strategy in terms of how we message about mental health. But let me not jump too much into that. So just going into some more Best Starts basics. This is just funding basics for anyone who's curious about how the taxes work and where the funding is coming from. And this next slide goes into more about the different areas. And so in terms of the work, we're over here in sustaining the gains, that age 5 to 24 component, but there's also investing early for folks who have done working with prenatal or with infants or toddlers. And we have other work as well, including homelessness prevention and data and evaluation and all sorts of good things. So we're doing a lot of work and investing a lot into community. And there's a lot of orgs who have been collaborating with us, which we're really excited about. So this particular bucket of funds is a very, very small bucket in comparison to the overall BSK strategy. So going into this next slide, and I definitely encourage folks, if you're curious, you can always Google this information, and there's plenty of info on Google that'll show you just more about Best Starts and our background and what we focus on and why. So getting into community well-being and who we are, for anyone familiar with Best Starts 1.0, there was still a lot of work we were doing, but we were a little smaller and there were not as many strategy areas. So community well-being is very new for the Best Starts family. What I overall love about it is that it actually got its starts out of the public health COVID response. And so this is before I was even with the county, since I came in early on this year. But in our team, we were able to start the community wellbeing initiative just due to what we were seeing with COVID early on. We knew that just based off of the nature of what was happening with the pandemic, that community would need more support. We would need to figure out, like, how do we prevent community from having difficulties or struggling with the fallout of the pandemic. And so we focused on creating culturally relevant programming that's focused on emotional health and well-being so that we could reduce that stigma associated with mental health and really focus on the strengths, right? So reinforcing compassion, connection, and care. And so a lot of it is really grounded overall holistic and individual community health and creating just equitable systems and structures. And so the way that we do this work is really do reducing that stigma, reinforcing compassion, connection, and care, and also partnering with community to share resources, and also convening work groups and groups of community just to focus on the emotional health and well-being of young people. So though we are releasing this RFP, we do sometimes pop up in community in a variety of capacities, including partnering with coalitions to offer free mental health supports to community and all sorts of things. And if anyone is ever curious about our work, I definitely encourage you to look into it. But we're doing a lot of different things generally to focus on community well-being. And for us, that really means a lot of what has been mentioned on this slide. So that's just a background of who community well-being is, which is underneath Best Starts for Kids. So now we can jump into the RFP finally. And so I'm going to pause really quick just to check the chat and see if there are any particular questions or things I should be aware of. But overall, just deeply appreciative of how many folks have joined for today and to see the supports too on our end in terms of the technical assistance providers. So going into what this RFP is, who is it for? So it is for organizations that have experience fostering youth-led projects and youth voice. I firmly believe that we have to work and partner with young people in order to release these solutions in our communities. I love seeing youth voice work. And so even though this project overall says youth-led communications, and people would assume we're focusing on the communications aspect, we are, but at the heart of this project itself is that focus on youth leadership and voice. And so we do define a little bit like what we mean by youth voice and youth leadership in the RFP. But overall, we really would love to see in applications is that intentional emphasis and focus on young people really helping to co-design this project, young people being engaged, young people really supporting the social media aspect of it. And just as important, we also want to make sure that we are working with an organization that has demonstrated experience working with historically marginalized communities. And this is just based off the data that we've seen in terms of youth mental health rates in which communities are being disproportionately impacted by stigma associated with mental health. And so this does not mean that we're shutting out other groups of young people, but more just making sure that there is an equity focus on the communities that we know have been disproportionately impacted. And then last but not least, I would also say we really want to see experience in social media and communications, but we recognize that we are asking for a lot and that not every organization may have experience doing communications campaigns, and maybe they're great at working with youth. And so what I would say to that is it is okay if you contract out or if you bring in a partner to help with this project. In fact, this particular RFP itself is designed based off of previous projects that the county has done with CBOs. And so this is not a traditional project where we would just give you all the funds and then say, I wish you luck, and I hope that you're just able to figure this out yourself. We will be very, very focused on supporting and really providing resources. And also we would love to see a collaborative element if that is something that your organization is interested in. So if you decide to apply as a group of 3 orgs, we would love that. If you decide to be one org who's just contracting out, that's fine. Or if your org is big enough to do all of this, that's also great. We're really, really flexible with this because we just want to make sure that this project overall is successful. And success can look so many different ways. So going into how this work connects to BSK overall, the campaign was developed with the value and understanding that peer-to-peer messaging is powerful. That peer messenger model, there's nothing else that really works better. Like, people just generally trust people that come from their communities and are their peers. And there's some research that backs that up that we kind of went into. And so this project is also located underneath the Community Wellbeing Initiative and the Liberation and Healing Strategy and underneath Sustain the Gain. So it's kind of like, it reminds me kind of those nesting eggs. It sounds like a lot of different things, but it does not matter too much. I would not get caught up on any of this or wonder like, what do we mean by liberation and healing strategy? This is more just for people who want to know. But one thing that is important to know is for anyone who is applying, just be aware that we do have another RFP out that is called the Youth Healing Project, and that might be confusing for some people. And just recognize those are 2 separate RFPs, both youth-led projects, because we love youth-led work, but they're 2 separate things that are happening right now. And so we want to really focus on increasing the well-being of youth and centering them in this work. And overall goals are promoting social, emotional, and mental health, reducing/preventing youth substance use. And we bring up youth substance use because it is a subset of youth mental health, but it's often one that is forgotten. And so we're just naming it so that folks are aware. And really reducing that stigma associated with mental health and sharing culturally relevant resources with youth. All of it sounds very broad, and that is intentional because we really want the org to be able to define it more. We want the young people to be able to really define what mental health looks like to them. And that is actually a question that is on the RFP. So that's just a brief overview. And these slides will be available on the Best Starts for Kids blog. So I would not worry too much for anyone who's like, I want to make sure to dive more into this information. It will be available for you to look at later, I promise. So informing the campaign, I put this up here because I really want people to have access to this resource. And I will make sure to drop the link in the chat towards the end. But what's great about this RFP is that it was actually developed with the voices of young people. So we did not go sit out and say, let's do youth leadership and not include young people. We actually were very, very intentional about bringing young people in. And so we were able to have a MPH student help design this. And so what she did is she really went out and did a landscape assessment just to figure out what campaigns, what communication strategies are being used, what platform preferences did young people have. And then she also did some focus groups. So she talked to the young people and asked them, like, what would you like to see? Like, what would make you more likely to engage in mental health on social media? What social media pages should we really be looking at? And so from that information, we're able to come up with an amazing presentation. And so for any organization that is applying, that is actually available to you. It is listed on the Zoom Grants portal. There's a link to it. It's also included in the RFP announcement itself. And if your organization does receive funding, we're always happy to talk more about this campaign and just to provide support around like the information that we got, because it is an amazing resource to have. But just wanted to bring this up so that folks are aware that there was some intentional development that went into this. And I will say the biggest overall finding from this campaign or from this focus groups and the landscape assessment was that young people really, really value authenticity. So a quick summary. Overall, the funding will be $140,000, which is a little smaller than some of the awards we've been seeing roll out of other Best Starts for Kids strategies. And the reason why that funding is smaller is because the actual contract period is not very long in comparison to some of the other RFPs we've been seeing. So this one is very project specific. So we want the contracts to start sometime in the fall, not because we want you to launch a project immediately. We know it takes a while to set up a really good youth-led project. And to prepare the young people for the project itself. But look at the time in 2022 as a chance really to start to plan and to recruit and to make sure that you have the capacity that you need to do this project. And 2023 will be the main focus of actually seeing the social media campaign itself happen. So we're only going to fund one org because our overall focus of this is really just on seeing this communications project happen so that we can really respond to the need we've been seeing. So it is a pretty decent sized award for the amount of time. And in the actual RFP announcement, there is a example budget that I drew up just so people can get an idea of how those funds could be used, but it's very, very flexible overall. In terms of timeline, the RFP was released a week and a half ago, I believe, if I'm doing the math correctly. Which has been really cool. And so now we're also in this info session. We will not do an in-person one, but in terms of receiving additional support outside of this info session, I definitely would encourage you all to reach out to our technical assistance providers. I saw one of them introducing themselves in the chat, which is really exciting. And so they are a resource. They are excited to help. And you can also reach out to that email I provided at the beginning for any questions you may have. And so we ask that people start working on their applications. I know like a little sooner. I know people wait until the last minute. I get it. I do. I used to be a grant writer myself and also a program manager in nonprofits. And I am guilty of waiting until the last couple of days to really put time into that application. But the issue with that is that if you wait too long, you cannot get support from the technical assistance providers because they need at least 48 hours of lead time to be able to respond to someone. And in terms of asking the county questions, we also need just a little bit more time to be able to respond. And so I encourage you all to at least start working on this before these dates that you're seeing listed so that you can get that support you need. But the application will be due on the 16th at 2 p.m. So please make sure to note that time at 2 p.m. so that you're not submitting it at 3 and realizing Zoom Grants is closed. And so the RFPs will be reviewed from September 19th to the 26th. These dates are not set in stone, they're more just an estimate. If we are feeling like we're delayed in any kind of way, we'll make sure to communicate. In terms of the interviews, we're not anticipating doing interviews. However, if we need to, we will update that and make sure to let folks know. And we'll notify people of their status of their applications sometime in October, and the contract negotiation will start in October. And we're hoping that the contracts will start sometime around November, depending on how quickly turnaround time is, which it might vary just depending on needs and conversation, which is totally okay. We can always backdate that contract start date if things are taking a little bit longer. And I encourage folks to definitely, if you have any questions at any point, to put them in the chat, and I'll make sure to stop and pause to answer those. Perfect. So funding priorities. It is very, very flexible. I intentionally made this RFP low barrier and easy to access because I did not want to make too much work for you all. And also I've been on the end of a complicated RFP before, so I didn't want to create that pain for anyone else. But we do want to make sure that overall this is aligned with the goal of promotion and prevention for youth. So a good application, as long as your budget is easily understandable and we can see where the funds are going, you should be fine. I did highlight the particular amount of please make sure, and this is a question that comes up on the actual narrative, please make sure that you are including youth stipends or incentives. If it's not coming out of this budget, then just note that you are compensating young people from a different budget or from a different funding source. But overall, we want to make sure that it's equitable and that young people are being compensated fairly, and that the money is not all going to just staff. And that's just because sometimes there can be equity issues in terms of young people being fairly compensated or young people being respected for their time. And so I just want to make sure that that's actually something that is being prioritized in those applications. I see there was a question in the chat. Is there a maximum percentage for allocation of admin costs in the budget? Yeah, so if it's overhead, I would say not exceeding 20% would be our focus. And so I'll make sure to add that to, 1 second. I'll make sure to add that to the actual, oh no, it looks like it restarted. 1 second, everyone. That's definitely, there we go. Okay. There we go. But in terms of that particular question, I'll make sure to add it to the Zoom Grants portal so that you can refer back to that. So going to this next slide, for data and evaluation, it's pretty straightforward. If you've ever received funding from Best Arts for Kids, we typically work on building a measurement and evaluation plan with the individual once they've received funding, just so that it's actually specific to the organization's needs and also specific to whatever capacity you may have. And so I would not worry too much about measurement evaluation. We will not make it overly complex. This particular project will look a little different in terms of how someone would measure and evaluate things, especially because we're looking at things like hashtags, post reach, or engagement, or whatever other social media metrics they may be using, which could definitely vary. We also are looking at things like collecting information from young people in terms of whether or not this campaign has reached them. And so survey questions could include reflections on like whether or not the content directed to young people actually supports them in terms of reaching mental health supports, or did they actually see a reduction in stigma around mental health? So it'll be designed in partnership with our evaluation staff, and we will make sure that it is not too arduous. But if you have any questions about data and evaluation and what that could look like, there is a section in the RFP where we talk about what capacity for evaluation measures could look like. We list some examples. And so I definitely encourage folks to take a look at that for more information, or to reach out to some of our technical assistance providers for help around that as well. And so I wanted to make sure to put the narrative here just so that people can see it. And if you haven't had a chance to look at it, you can check it out now. But in terms of the narrative, it's very, very straightforward. We are not looking for these long responses, but we do want to make sure that you are fully answering the question. So I would say in terms of applications, please make sure that you are answering those questions and that you are following the rubric or the rating criteria that is listed in the RFP itself. And I see there's a question in the chat. I will make sure to answer that in one moment. So in terms of some of these questions, things to be on the lookout for is, especially is how do you define youth leadership? And like, what does leadership mean for your organization? This is something that will be weighted, that we will be focusing in on. We also, going back to that slide I mentioned before about making sure to note that you are compensating youth. That is an actual question we'll ask as well in the narrative, which is, have you compensated youth in the past? And do you plan to compensate youth? How are you going to compensate them? And then in terms of implementing social media campaigns, we are not weighing it against you if you do not have experience leading social media campaigns, but we do want to know that you have a plan for how you're going to do the social media campaign if you have not had experience prior. Because we know that, and our rationale for why we're focusing so much on youth leadership is it is much harder for an organization to suddenly become a youth voice expert than it is for an organization to get comm support. And that is just based off of personal experience and also some suggestions we received from community as we were developing this RFP. So we really want to make sure you're focusing on that youth voice aspect, but that also if you're a little shaky on the communications experience, that's okay to acknowledge, but at least having a plan for how you're going to address the communications if you do not have experience around that. And so let me pause really quick just to see what questions are coming up in the chat. And thank you all for just being really engaged. So I see as to mental health supports, what would be the percentage for allocation of the budget? So the mental health supports are not direct mental health supports. It's more what we're looking for is when the young people are doing the social media post or whatever the communications campaign will look like, that there is an intentional effort to connect people to resources. And so it could look as simple as saying, oh, I heard there's mental health first aid resources out there. Let me post this on our social media channel and share this with community. It's not necessarily direct work. It's more promoting the direct work that's happening out there on social media so that people are aware. And so then I see there's another question on your goals. Number 4 was young people reporting excellent health. My concern is that we don't know what their baselines are. An improvement type measure may be a better measurement of success. No worries if your internet is in and out. And you bring up an excellent point there. That is true. We are not aware of the baseline. A lot of this data we're looking at would actually have to be more aggregate than it would be individual. And so we're aware of that. And that's definitely something that we would talk a lot about in terms of the actual project itself once the organization receives funding. And so does the Zoom grants page have a character limit for narrative questions? No. So what's great about this RFP, and I did this intentionally because I know Zoom grants is glitchy sometimes. The actual narrative will be a Word document. So when you go into Zoom grants, you'll see that the only questions that ask are summary questions. That's the only things you'll put in there besides uploading documents. So the budget and the narrative itself will be external documents that you'll just fill out on your computer so that you don't have to worry about character limits or glitching or saying you're over the limit when you're not, because I've been there and it's not fun when that happens. And I just want to make sure to cut down on any technical issues people could potentially have. Yeah, so following up on the mental health question. In terms of that, what I would suggest if you are having issues troubleshooting and trying to figure out like how to update it or to amend your information, you can absolutely reach out to the contact email that the county provided, and we can figure out what to do next regarding that. Yeah, so definitely reach out. We are a resource that are here to help, and yeah. And I would say that for anyone, like if something happens, you're like, oh, I actually misunderstood this and I need support, definitely reach out to us and we'll figure out next steps on what we can do. So this is not a beautiful screenshot, but I did put this here just so that you all can see it. It looks a lot better in the actual document itself. But I just wanted you all to have a chance to glance at this rating criteria. And so this is located in the actual rating criteria section of the announcement. I would say for anyone who really wants a good application, definitely looking at that announcement. I know it's long. I promise though that it is not a full 20 pages. The majority of those 20 pages are actually just attachments and extra information that you have to have because of legal reasons. But those first 10 pages carry a lot of important information in terms of how to actually write out the application itself and the rationale behind why we want the applications to look a certain way. And so that rating criteria page, very, very helpful because that's what we'll be assessing people on is just these sort of questions like leadership opportunities for young people and understanding of what leadership actually is. And then youth compensation and pay equity, that is its own question separately. Experience implementing. And so if the organization has no experience implementing, do you have a plan? And of course, we have the equity and social justice that's just there that we make sure to include in all of our RFPs. And then we ask questions like, do you have experience working on mental health or substance use projects and other things as well? And so as you all can see, like as long as you are paying close attention to this rating criteria as you're filling out your application and answering the questions directly, your application should be very, very good to go. We will not rate people on things that are not there. We would never say like, oh, well, we really wanted to see this thing, but we didn't tell them that because that's not equitable or fair. And so definitely take a look at this rating criteria. If you're trying to think through like, what's a good application look like? Or what is it that they're looking for? So like, as I was saying, just making sure that you're carefully reviewing that criteria. And so the RFP review panel is folks who work for the county, it's community members, it's all sorts of folks who are subject matter experts. And so they will make sure they are following that scoring rubric very closely. They will not deviate from it. And all proposals go through a formal review process, which I will not go into detail about here because it's a little complicated and somewhat convoluted sometimes. But if anyone has any questions about it or needs to go through the appeals process, it is outlined in the RFP itself as well. But overall, the proposals are scored and assessed by multiple people, not just one, which ensures that we really are not coming in with any bias in particular, and that we're really making sure that multiple people can actually see this and really assess this fairly. So yeah. So in terms of application tips, please be sure to read the instructions, like very, very closely read the instructions. It always makes me so sad when I see an application, I get excited, and then it's immediately disqualified because someone forgot something as simple as this is a youth-led project, or it has a focus on mental health, or there needs to be some reference to communications or social media. So please, please, please be sure to read those instructions, and do not be afraid to ask for help or ask clarifying questions. Because I am sure if you have a question, someone else probably has a similar question and is just afraid to ask that question. And then be creative. Like, we really want to see like really fun, innovative, community-led projects. I personally love social media and social media campaigns and talking about mental health and supporting community. And so I like, the sky is the limit on this. Like, if you come up with something that you're like, what if we did TikToks with young people? Absolutely, that's what we want to see. And most importantly, we encourage small groups, collectives, grassroots organizations, all sorts of configurations to apply. We recognize that a successful project does not look one way. And so it could be that maybe it's you and 2 other organizations. Maybe it's a grassroots group of youth leaders who decide to come and say, hey, I want to work with your org on this. Absolutely. Or maybe it's one org, but we encourage so many different groups to apply. Because we really want to make sure that this is being responsive to community. And so, yeah. So these are just some tips to keep in mind as you're working through your application. In terms of budget, the budget should be developed for the length of the contract term. So it is okay if it takes you like 3 months to start up the actual communications campaign. You can still, like, in that 3-month lead up time, say like you're using this time to compensate staff for planning. That is totally okay to mention. If you're applying as one organization, just make sure to note that. But if it's multiple orgs, we definitely want to make sure that there are like individual budgets, because what we wouldn't want to see is it's saying there's 3 orgs, but only 1 org is being compensated. And if that is the case, then having a good rationale for why that is. And so you can budget by hourly rate, FTA, whatever, as long as it depends, whatever depends on your structure. And I know this sounds like it should be more complicated, but I promise it really isn't. We're just trying to make sure it's straightforward and easy to follow. But if you do have questions, you can definitely ask. So in terms of the technical assistance, we do have TA providers. They are amazing. In the Zoom grants library for this RFP, you will see there's a list detailing who they are and their contact information so that you can actually reach out. So when you reach out to TA providers, what I ask is that you wait at least 24 hours before you reach out to another person, because it takes around maybe like anywhere between 24 to 48 hours before they may respond. They might respond quicker, but just give them that 48 hours window to respond. And so please make sure to reach out to them before that RFP close day, so they have a few days at least. But the sooner you reach out to them, the better. But what TA providers can do is really ensure, like, is this a good fit for you? Like, does it seem like your org would be able to do this project? And they can help answer questions because they've been briefed on what to expect. They know what a good fit is. We've talked about it together. And it can help with just the application. So they're not going to write the grant for you, but they can help you with writing a good RFP because that's what they're there for. So I definitely encourage you all to reach out to them. They're amazing and very, very focused on community. Some of them are community folks themselves. So they're an amazing resource to utilize that is free of charge. So additional resources, this is the email that I referenced before. This info session and the recording of it will be posted on the Best Starts for Kids blog so that you can refer back to this if you can't remember a question that I answered, or you're just trying to share this with someone. You can always go back and look, and you can email this particular email for any questions you may have. And this email is also listed on the blog announcement for this, as well as the Zoom grants page for this RFP. There's also a glossary of terms for relevant definitions if you're curious, but overall, that is all I had. And so what questions do people have? Or like just things that you might be thinking through that would be helpful to get support around.
I didn't see anything to raise my hand, and I was trying to be respectful, but I didn't want you to think I didn't have a question. So should I type it in the chat, or can I go ahead and ask the question now? Great, thank you so very much. So may my nonprofit have a for-profit to come in and run the particular project that I'd like to implement?
Yeah, no, that's totally allowed. So if you're like collaborating with a for-profit entity, that is totally okay. I'm just making sure to note that in your application so that we're aware.
Okay. So, and then I totally understand the boiler something information that goes along with that in terms of following those rules and being in compliance. You know, I totally get that. I just wanted to make sure that it would be okay to bring in the for-profit. And so, yeah, I was the one that asked the mental health question. Circling back, if I understand correctly, if I've submitted the grant and I need to get some things going or change some things, it sounds like I have time to go in and say, let me get a TA and go from there and get some things kind of tweaked. This is my second time trying, and I'm so new trying to really understand, because it can be a little convoluted sometimes. But you made it very clear, Michaela. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I would always say, like, if there are any questions or if you're like wondering, like, or second guessing yourself, always reach out to us. We will make sure to respond. Yes. Yeah, but what other questions are coming up for folks? Or like clarifications that might be helpful?
I have a question. I'm Becca from Seattle's LGBTQ+ Center, which is formerly Gay City, and we do a lot of youth advocacy work, and particularly with a lot of these priority populations. And I guess my question is, our work is really centered around QT BIPOC young people and doing prevention and harm reduction work. And is your goal with this that like our messaging that we would create with this be like applicable for all young people with a lens of the most marginalized within those communities, or is it okay that it would really be centered around like the marginalized communities that we're serving?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's a tricky one. I would say more to the first. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of resources out there that are generally just targeted to all youth. But it is okay if that particular page that you're running does have a particular emphasis on, say, LGBTQ youth, because we know based off data that that population does need a lot of support. But also just making sure that your marketing could be accessible for young people across the county, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, that does. Thank you.
Yeah, and very excited to see just all of the interest in the variety of organizations. Yeah, and it's okay if people don't have questions right now, because I know that I'm someone who will sit and then the next day I'm like, oh, I should have asked that. And so if that comes up for you, you are more than welcome to reach out to the contact email and to ask those questions then. I'll also make sure to the questions that were asked today to post them on Zoom Grants as an amendment, just so people can see that. And can remember what the answers were, because I know that we're all busy and we can't remember everything off the top of our heads. So I'll make sure to put that in writing.
Along those lines, are these slides available on the portal already? Okay.
Well, not already, but they will be after this. Yes. And it's great since BSK Comms is very involved in this project and on the call right now. So it will be there. Yeah. Okay, well, if there are no other questions coming up, I can give everyone back 15 minutes to maybe enjoy the sun. I don't know if it's getting too hot yet or not outside. Hopefully it's not. But I definitely encourage folks to reach out if they have any questions or concerns. But I just want to say thank you all so much just for joining.